Uh, uh, yeah, thanks for joining. If you want me to wait, I can wait for a few more minutes. Or since you are the only person there, if you want me to start, I can start with today's session. Uh, can you let me know? Hi guys, thank you for joining today. Looks like there are very few people who are joined for today's session. So I think uh, I will start now because yeah, I have waited like around 10 minutes for people to join. So let's start. So please feel free to ask if there are any doubts or if something that you don't understand because it's just two of us as of now. Okay, so let's get started. Uh, can one of you, let me know what is a species community when you talk in terms of species? How do we define a community? Or does anyone knows what a species community is? Okay, then I will go ahead. So, species community is nothing but it's a group of interacting species that inhabit a particular location at a particular time. Okay, if you look at plants present in an area, so you're looking at the species that are present in a similar area that are interacting with each other and simultaneously at the time those are present. So there can be communities of microbes to communities of plants. So there can be communities of anything. So but they have to be of office group, specific group. So people or the researchers who study communities, they're referred to as community ecologists. So what do they study? They study the number of species in a particular location and ask by the number of species and the species, which species is present across time, how they change over time, and which species will be present now, may not be present later on, and how these processes are have been going on. And they also study communities in different locations. Like one can be studying, it can be studying from in Western Ghats and in Himalayas and ask why the number of species differ with location. Like if you are studying in Western Ghats, specifically southern Western Ghats, to the northern Western Ghats, if you go, why the number of species in the communities in southern Western Ghats are higher than compared to uh, the northern Western Ghats, especially in Maharashtra and then Gujarat. So why? So these are all the things that comes under commu- the regime of what community ecologists generally tend to ask and try to find out answers to. So, what are the characteristics of a community when you look at it? So you can characterize a community using multiple attributes that are are representative of a community. If you remember, we had discussed these activities earlier in the earlier sessions, specifically the species richness, which basically species diversity and species evenness or evenness of the community. So species richness is basically the total number of species present in a community, while species diversity includes a measure that uh, that takes in consideration the abundance of the species also, along with the number of species in the community. If you remember, Shannon's diversity index, Simpson's diversity index, which we have calculated, are the examples of species diversity indices, or are the ways of measuring species diversity in a particular community. And species evenness is something that describes the distribution of abundances across species in a community. So how species are present in terms of their abundances. Uh, there can be communities where you have single species that is pretty abundant, and other species are very rare. Like for example, if you take a sal forest or a teak forest, if you're looking at plant communities in that forest, so the most abundant will be a sal tree or the teak tree, and the other species will be very uh, few in number. So it's this the community is not much even because there is single species that is dominating the whole community. So while if you look at some other forests, there can be all the species are present in equal abundances. Then you can say this community is much more even than the ones in Saul or teak forest. So these are some of the ways that we can characterize communities, and we can also characterize communities with respect to the growth form and structure. They can be grasses, trees, herbs, shrubs. So this is based on their growth form. So if this community you're studying is for grasses, you can call this as a grass community or so on. And then based on dominance also, like we are just talking about species abundances. So this is a sal forest. So all the most of the trees that you can see are sal, and there are few associated plants that are found in sal forests around. So you use dominance of a species to characterize a community also, and then you'll also look at relative abundances. So it's not just the dominance. With respect to the whole community, what's the abundance of this particular species? So, uh, for instance, if you look at this picture where there are two different communities present, uh, can you guys find out which community has greater species and which has a greater evenness? Feel free to write down the answers in the chat box if you don't want to answer it. Okay, so community A versus community B, which has higher species richness. Let's go with species richness first. Then we can go after evenness a little later. So which of these two communities, A and B, are has a greater basic species richness? Species richness is higher for community B. Okay. Uh, what about evenness? What you guys think of evenness? Which community might be high even? Basically, for the community to be even, you need to have all the species in equal abundances. Okay. Uh, okay, let's go with species richness. If you have calculated the evenness, please write it in the chat box so that we can verify it together. In the meantime, let's go with the species richness. So basically, you're trying to count the different number of species present in this community. So this is, let's say this is one, this is two, one, two, this is species three, this is species four, and this is species five, right? So the total species richness of this community is five species. So, yeah, five. If you come to community B, it's species one, species two, species three, species four, species five. Have I missed anything else? So there are just five. One, two, three, four, and five different species, right? So this also has five species. Okay, so species richness is similar for communities A and B. So there is no much difference. A and B species richness is similar. Let's look at abundances. So basically, species one in this community is most abundant. If you count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Species 1, we have 21 individuals. Species 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, also 1. Similarly, for community B, species 1 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Simultaneously, 2 is also 5. 3 is 5. 4, 5. 6, 5. So if you look here, there is one species that is present in higher numbers. All others are present in low numbers, like 21, 1, 1, 1, 1. Here, all the species are present in equal numbers. So this community is much more even. The community B is more even compared to community A. So the other way we can, instead of looking at numbers, what we can do, we can just have a plot. Sorry for this. Okay, just a minute. Let's just go back to the slide which you are doing. Okay. Uh, I hope the screen is visible now. Should be visible. Just a minute. Yeah, just a minute. I'm just sharing it again. It's a problem from my end. I'm sorry for that. I don't know what's happening with this tool. Still, I'm sorry. I'm not able to do it again. Let me just exit the call and then try it again. Yeah, let me just start the presentation again. Yeah, finally. Yeah, sorry for that. Uh, so basically, what happens is, if you can plot the abundances on the y-x-axis, uh, x-axis here. So so species here on the x-axis, species like species one, and then abundance on the y-axis like one, two, three, 4, 5. So species 1 will be present here. Let's say we are plotting a box plot. Okay, species 2 is also here. Species 3 is also here. So it's more or less, a flat line. So all the species are present in equal amount. So it's more like it's flat line. But if you look at in a community that is more uneven, like this one, so the one individual is like say 21 individuals, and all are one each. So it looks like more like this. So there's one single dominant species, and other species are present in very few numbers. Happening again. I'm so sorry for this. So basically, I hope you guys understood how we calculate it, right? So the abundances versus species richness. So just give me a second so that I can go back with the presentation again. Yeah, yeah. You guys can see the presentation, right? So now we just have had a look at like how these things change, especially the species. How do we characterize communities, and then how do we compare different communities? We had done this earlier also. I just quickly went over it again. So, so since we know that these communities extend, there is a difference in communities. So there have been various theories on how why do we find communities the way they are. So some of the famous theories, one of those famous theories is this Clements theory, which says that community is a superorganism or discrete unit which has sharp boundaries. So they exhibit properties which are more than the sum of individual parts. So basically, whatever the species that are present in the community, whatever the properties that individual species exhibit, communities exhibit many more properties than what species exhibit individually. So Clements put up this view that these communities are more like a superorganism, while there is another theory called Hubble's neutral theory. So where under this theory, highly diverse communities, the community that you see which has higher species richness that arise are basically due to chance extinctions are balanced by speciation. So chance extinctions are basically species getting extinction just by chance, and these extinctions are simultaneously balanced by new species forming by speciation events. Okay, so and the concept of neutrality here means that at a given trophic level in a food web, species are all equal. So there is no such thing as herbivore, carnivore, or such things, or some predator. So every each and every species in the community present in that area are neutral in terms of the trophic level, the birth rates, death rate, dispersal rates, whatever you measure. Okay, so all of these things are neutral or similar in those terms. So that's why this theory is also referred to as Hubble's neutral theory. Hi, Uzma, can you mute yourself? Okay, so so that's why Hubble's theory is also referred to as Hubble's neutral theory. So, for example, if you see this representative diagram, uh, if, let's imagine there is a species community present in an area, and there have been deaths that has happened, and say from here this point to point this tree has died, and there is this empty space that has happened, and then due to immigration and then increased births, there is a new species that has come up, right? And then this thing happens multiple times, and then the species can be a species that is present within the same community that can happen because there are births happening, or due to immigration that can be a new species that arise from a different place. So this thing goes on till it reaches an equilibrium, and then what we see today is some of those communities that are present in those equilibriums. Okay, so here there is no such thing as distinct roles. All of the species are considered of equal hierarchy. So that's why they are referred to as neutral. And then similarly, the third hypothesis is Gleason's individualistic theory. So where a set of species that disperse to an area have shared adaptations to that environment. So when you see a community, what you're seeing is basically a set of species that that are have adapted to that sort of abiotic environment in terms of rainfall, temperature, and other abiotic factors. So because they are seen together because they share those adaptations together, that's why you tend to see those species together. So these are some of those theories that have been used to explain why species or why communities are the way they are. So the other thing that you can do is you can classify species into species guilds. So if you look here at some of these photos here, uh, can you guys quickly class group them species into species guilds or species into similar groups, and you can write which all can form into group one, group two, group three, something like that. Which species can be called into a similar group. uh, is anybody going to answer it, which species belong to which guild, or basically similar looking species or species that has similar sort of functions can be classified into the guilds. So for instance, if you look at these birds here, uh, let's say these birds A and E, they have this little bit of curved beak, so they can form a similar guild. or similar group. And the second group can be these birds which have elongated beaks and have you know this specific type of toes. And this bird that has a special beak and a different way of flight. So these birds are or sunbirds. As if you look at in the species groups, the sunbirds, these are woodpeckers, these are shorebirds. These are, so basically the way they function is different if you look at species across these groups. So these two species are majorly insectivores. Sorry, uh, these are nectarivores. These are mostly insectivores, and these are piscivores or fish-eating birds majorly. So you can classify species into what we call species guilds based on uh, what they feed, how they behave, and so on. So here we classify basically majorly on the appearances or the way they feed. Okay, so as I was saying, we classify based on the appearance, and then this appearance is we are saying this appearance has uh, trying to understand it with respect to what this bird feeds. So similarly, so we are basically giving the species a unique position with respect to others. So so this is what when we call niche of a species. This is what we try to refer to. Okay, if you look at temperature and rainfall, a species would like to be in. So a species can be like to be present with medium levels of temperature, medium temperature, and then relatively medium rainfall. And there can be another species that likes low temperature and low rainfall. There can be another species that likes little higher temperature and higher rainfall, but overlaps with species one. So what all if you look at just say we're just go back to and look at species one here. Let's say so the species is present can be found only in those areas that has this amount of temperature and then this amount of rainfall. Okay, so this you can call this as a niche of the species. Basically, it talks about how the species is present with respect to some specific resource here, or it's about its environment. Here, you are describing its environment with respect to two variables, the temperature and rainfall. So, what is the area that the species is present with respect to temperature and rainfall? So, these niches can overlap with other species or may not overlap with other species. So if it overlaps with other species, it can lead to either reduction of the niche or the expansion of the niche owing to different factors. Like if competition happens, it might have to reduce. It will reduce in niche. If some mutualism happen, it will increase in niche space. So that is what we call as fundamental and realized niche. So fundamental niche is something if there is nothing else affecting. So what is the temperature versus rainfall region this species can be present in. So the species, for example, is present in this huge area, but due to another competitor or some any other factors, if the species is restricted to this smaller region in space, you call that as realizeness. So this is what you find. So mostly fundamental niches are bigger than the realized niche because competition plays a crucial role in deciding uh, deciding these things. So if because of competition, the realized niches are tend to be smaller than the fundamental niches. Okay, hope this was little clear. The fundamental versus realized niche. So basically, it describes about the environment or the way the species is present in a specific area. And coming to the next concept, so what you call is ecological succession. So basically, here in ecological succession, you are referring to how the communities change with time, how they succeed over time. So a lot of you might have heard how this will happen. So let's just go over it again. So process by which natural communities replace one and over another over time. So it's not like the communities what we see are the just the way they just started. So it might be in some cases, but not across all the cases. So they have been changing constantly. So if you look at, let's say, there's a newly formed island. So let's take the example of an island. So it's since most of these oceanic islands are formed of from post volcanic eruptions. They are mostly composed of solidified lava, basically forming into rock. So the species that come initially are the lichens. There are different type of lichens that come, and as the lichens come, so they help in the weathering of the rocks. So this leads to formation of little amount of soil and so on, and which simultaneously allows other species of plants, like it can be bryophytes or pteridophytes, so other plants to simultaneously utilize those nutrients or the space that was available which was not there earlier. And then this leads to further breakdown of the rocks and can lead to formation of little bit of soil. This can bring in different set of species. So since there is soil, you may not be able to see much lichen anymore on the rock, since the rock has been broken down due to chemical weathering and physical weathering. And then this you can have a plant community with dominated by grasses and perennial species. So and then later on, these species can be replaced by shrubs and shade intolerant trees. So and then after after a while, and this community can also be replaced by shade tolerant trees, or the species they might get replaced. So in the end, what the community is remain is called referred to as a climax community. So it's because it's called as the community that is present that comes at the end. And the communities that are present in the initial stages are referred to as pioneer species or pioneer communities, because there is a difference in the way the species are. Let's say, for example, if you look at lichens or small annual plants, so they are, they complete their life cycle fast. They are smaller, and while if you look at climate community, so the life cycle is very large. So they differ inherently in the properties they display as an organism. So this transition will take hundreds of years, and some of these transitions might be quick, but some of these transitions will take real long time. And this has been observed for a lot of especially in case of island, this has been observed. Like for example, the Krakatoa island that has that wherein volcanic eruption has removed much of the plant, much of the life there. So this succession has also been observed in those type of situations. So this succession can be classified into two different types. Since this the life on this place is starting from nothing, from bare rocks, so this can be referred to as primary succession, because it's happening for the first time. If it happens from a place where there is already some species present, you know we generally tend to refer it to as secondary succession. So what's the difference between primary and secondary succession? Secondary succession happens at much more faster rates, and there is if you look at in terms of soil, there is already soil present. So basically what happens in secondary section is basically the succession starts because the climax community or the previous community that is present in that area has been disturbed due to events like fire, or cyclones or tsunami or anything. So this destruction leaves the space to be colonized by species. So first annual plants may come, then grasses and perennials will come, and then it just goes on and form a and it will reach another climax again. So this is more like communities just trying to reach a climax, and then they tend to stay like that. So basically secondary sections, those are the difference between primary versus secondary. So secondary succession, you are not starting from the bare rock stage, because there is already enough uh, there was here in this case plant communities that were existing earlier, and then they would no longer exist because some event, catastrophic or disturbance has happened, led to the removal of the species communities, and then it has started. So this will happen at much more rapid rate than you know primary succession. Okay, so there can be different type of climax communities. If you look at climax communities, there are different factors that can govern, like what type of climax communities we can see. Some of those factors can be, there can be climate that is deciding what type of climatic climax you will see. Either those climatic factors can be temperature and rainfall. It will decide what type of community you will see. If the temperature and rainfall pattern changes, the community can also change. Let's say, for example, if the climax community that we are seeing in the area is a shrubland. Okay, if the temperature reduces and rainfall also reduces, so it can lead to frequent fires. If it leads to frequent fires, so the shrubland can be converted into a grassland. Or if it's a grassland, rainfall increases and the temperature is low, so it can be converted into shrub. So the climax community can differ with respect to the factors that are governing the you know presence of the specific community. There can be factors related to soil, some and events like fires, cyclones, and tsunamis, or catastrophic events can also govern, like what type of climax community that you see in a specific geographical area. And since we have, as humans have left our marks everywhere on this earth, so we are also affected the way communities are. So if those climax community that we are seeing is because of us, or disturbances related to our you know our activities, we term them as disclimax communities. And okay, uh, can someone say anything about keystone species, or what are keystone species? Or if you don't know the definition, can you, some of you guess who, an example for keystone species? It can be insect, plant, animal. It can be anything. Anybody is going to take a guess? Can wait. Okay, so let me just go ahead. So keystone species uh, are, if from the name itself is that they are very important in a community. Okay, so everyone might have seen this tree, right? Ficus bengalensis. It's a tree that that's seen across India in most of the places. It's famous for all the ghost stories that you might have heard as children, or for the shade it provides. And yeah, not only for the shade it provides to us, it also provides food for a lot of other organisms, mostly birds, especially in those seasons where other trees are not producing any sort of food. Okay, so coming to why this species is a keystone species. So we generally define keystone species as the species that have disproportionately greater effect compared to their abundance. So if you had just one of these ficus trees, or uh, there will be, if you just look in terms of birds, there will be hundreds of birds just coming and sitting onto the tree and then feeding on these figs it produces, right? However, its abundance is very low. Even if it's low, it has having a greater positive effect on the bird communities there. So that's why it's also referred to as keystone species. So what happens if you take out the species? So all the species that are depending on that species will be affected. If they are solely dependent on it, they might go extinct. But they're partially dependent on it, they will get greatly affected by that. So that's why keystone species are really important. So when we want to conserve some species, you tend to identify sometimes whether this species is a keystone species or not. So if you are conserving a keystone species, you are eventually conserving the all the things or the all the other species that are dependent on this species. Okay, so that's why keystone species are really important in ecosystems. And coming next to dominance diversity relationships. So uh, mostly dominant species in a species community play a crucial role in regulating the species diversity and ecosystem productivity of an area. So for example, for instance, if you look at it, numerically dominant species or the species that are present in higher numbers in a forest community can increase species diversity by influencing the establishment of new species. So or they can they can lead to eradication of species, reduction in species diversity. So they can have a both side effects. So either they can you know uh, have they can promote higher species diversity, or since the single species is so dominant, it will not allow other species to come into that community. So you can have both type of relationships when you have numerical dominant species in a community. And since we are looking at ecological succession, so these are some important terms that are generally used, called stability and resilience. So stability, if you look at it, the system, it's one having the low variability. So if you look, this is a famous model called model ball and cup model that is used to describe this. Okay, so if you think this as a cup and there is a ball here, okay, in this cup, and then so what does stability says? So stability talks about how much the system can move around here. So it can move this much to this side and then this much to this side. While this one can move little bit only. So when you look at these two systems, you can say the system one has low variability. So despite shifting environmental conditions, it will tend to stay in that area. So this is also referred to as resistance of the systems. So it will not vary much in the way if there is any variation or the shifting environmental condition that is happening, the system will tend to stay very close. While this system changes drastically much more than this. Okay, so this thing is called stability. So the variability in the system, if you're measuring, you refer to it as stability. While if you're looking, while resilience means it's a different aspect of stability, indicating whether the system will return to its original state once it has been disturbed. So what does this mean? So if you disturb a system that is present like this, whether will it come back to the original state or not? So if the system can come back to the original state, you can call as that system as resilient system. If it doesn't, you can say it as non-resilient system. Let me show how do you do that. So if you look here, we have this system. Let's say this has state one. So if this system is perturbated or subject to some environmental conditions, it can move till this area, right? If it moves till here, it can eventually come back, right? Similarly, if it goes this way till at this point at least, it will eventually come back. So till this level, if the disturbance moves the system to this level, it will eventually bounce back. So you can say the system is resilient till here. If the disturbance that has happened has moved this thing beyond this point, then it will eventually go into a different state, or basically here a different curve. Okay, so it has crossed a certain threshold and it has moved into a different state. So the resilience has gone. The system is no longer resilient because it has moved from one state to another state. And then it can also move back. It's not like it can go from state A to state B. It can also go from stage B to stage A. Similarly, the same thing. What happens in natural systems is generally, uh, because of ecological succession, the system, the state moves from one stage to another, or it can go back to another stage. But what is happening is because of uh, human related disturbances, these shifts are happening much more rapidly, and then these things simultaneously, are leading to degrade shifting systems especially, and then we call them sometimes after it crosses certain threshold, it has gone into a different region where you say that ecosystem is degraded. So let's say for example here there is this system, so where human disturbances and simultaneous ecological succession can move this system from this stable state to a degraded state, or it can move the system into a novel state where you are making a new system which doesn't exist without the things that we have done to it. So understanding the resilience of ecosystems are really important to predict, so whether the system that we are seeing as it is will be the same or will it shift if any changes happens, especially with respect to climate change and land use change, all these things happening and affecting species and the species communities. Yeah, so that is the importance of understanding resilience and stability of a system. So yeah, I think I have this much only for today. So please let me know if you want me to talk about anything else from previous assignments or previous sessions, because I think we have a lot of time, and since there were very few people, this thing went ended up finishing very quickly. So yeah, please do ask if you have any suggestions or questions, or if you want me to go ahead and start it from the beginning. I can start from the beginning again, like starting from communities. Do let me know what you want me to do in the chat box at least. I hope what I asked was clear to you. So I was basically asking if you want me to go over this session again, as very few were there from the beginning, or if that's okay. Uh, If you have any other questions, I can take those, or if you have clarifications regarding previous assignments, I can help you with that, or previous sessions. Please drop a response. in chat box, or you can unmute and ask if you have any. So I can wait for a few more minutes because there's plenty of time. Uh, this was a little clear. How do we differentiate, you know, communities that have greater evenness versus communities that are not that even, right? Okay, I will take it as S. And so we focused on theories, different theories that, you know, uh, sure, okay, let me just start from the beginning then. So, you know, we were just saying, till yesterday, we talked about populations, right? So, when you come to a community, so basically trying to understand a group, different species interacting together, that too in a particular location at a particular time. Okay, if you're looking at, let's say plants of uh, some region in Kodagu, so that region that can be called as, that community, because you are referring to particular location, you are looking at the plants at a particular time. And then people who study communities are referred to as community ecologists, and then they specifically try to understand why species change in a location over time, and why do we have different species across locations. Like, say, for example, if you're looking at plants, tree species from southern western ghats, which is, let's say, somewhere in Kerala, to northern western ghats somewhere in Maharashtra, northern Maharashtra, and then Gujarat. So you might find different species richness. So they try to understand why do we find these differences, and what are the factors that are affecting the species differences at across these locations. So that's what community ecology tends to do. So, and so the other way of looking at communities is to, characterize them. So how do we characterize communities? We can use attributes like species richness, species diversity, and species evenness in the communities. So, as everyone might be aware of, species richness is basically nothing but the total number of species present in a community. While species diversity, instead of just looking at the species richness, you also, put in this additional information about abundance of each species. So, how much abundant each species is? Is it rare? Is it common? Or is it dominant? Or very common? So you calculate the diversity using multiple things. Like, for example, you can use indices like Channel's, Simpson, to calculate which account for abundance of species. Or you can, calculate species evenness. So basically, you're trying to look at the distribution of abundance across species in a community. So that community, how the distribution of abundance changes. So it can be like all the species are equally abundant, then you will find, mostly a flat line. So if you look at a plot like this, so if you're looking at abundances, so if this is abundance, okay, has number of species. So if the community is even, so you can see mostly straight line. If it species on this x-axis, okay. So, but if there is a species that is most common or most abundant, and the other species are rare, so you will see something like this, or you can just see something just like this. So there are multiple ways you can have, you know species distribution, the abundance distributions of community. So simultaneously you can have communities differentiated in terms of, growth form and structure. Like, this community has major dominated by trees, while this other community is dominated by herbs and grasses, and so on. And then dominance, as we were saying earlier, if you look at in this sal, a picture of the sal forest from Shivaliks, you can see all the trees are just sal because this community is dominated by sal. All, but this has been planted. So, but if you see in true communities where they just for natural communities where the natural communities are grown, there can be species that single species that represent across, and we can also characterize communities based on the relative abundance. So relative abundance is basically what is the abundance of this species with respect to others. So dominant species has higher or higher relative abundance scores. So yeah, so there is this example where uh, I asked about, yeah, which community has greater number of species and which community has greater evenness. So basically, species richness, if you might remember, we calculate species richness by basically counting the number of species in the community, right? So we have five species here. Simultaneously, we also have five species here. So both the communities have similar species richness. But are the communities same? No, we can see from the the number of individuals and say they are not same. So how do we calculate that? So we quantify it using the number of individuals of each species. Basically, we are trying to find out which is much more even, which is not even, or basically which has species that dominates the community. So in community one, we have species one 21 individuals. Others are one individual each. Whilst community B, we have five species with five individuals each. The total is 25. Total is 25 here also, but all of them are same. So if you plot this curve for you know species B, sorry, community B, what you get is a straight line, right? If you plot y-axis and y-axis the number of individuals, whilst if you do the same thing for community A, what you get is something like this, right? One species is 21 individuals, all other species are one individual. So it just drops and then it just runs flat. So you can say that from the values also you can say, but if you can plot a plot like this, you could also say if it's a straight line, the species community is much more even. And here you have a dominance by a single species. So this can also happen in many times. So this is what we see mostly, not we don't get to see perfectly even community. We see mostly communities that have dominated by at least one or two species and then their associates. So we then went on to understand the different theories put forward to uh, describe why how why the communities are the way they are. So one of the theories was Clement's theory, where uh, where each community is thought of as a superorganism. So basically, superorganism concept has been majorly used for ants also, wherein it's not a single unit, but it's a functioning unit where all of the individual components come together and form this thing, and then it performs functions that individuals cannot do themselves. Okay, so that's the Clement's view of community, and then we have Hubble's neutral theory. So wherein uh, this theory tends to explain why we see highly diverse communities, the communities that are much more diverse. There's not like seeing one or two species present in an area. And then the word neutral comes in this. The word neutral in this theory name refers to the neutrality in the species identity. So all the species, irrespective of their identity or the trophic level, are considered equal. So a lion and cheetah, in a, if you're looking at a community that has if you look mammal community of let's say Kanha tiger reserve, the lion, langur, cheetal, everyone is similar, you know, according to this theory. So are neutral, and then there is no much difference between much of these things that you measure for each species. It can be birth rates, dispersal rates, and speciation rates. But we know this is not what happens. But according to this theory, it considered each of the species present in that community as neutral and tries to explain it. So there are different processes that leads to the species. So if you look at it, deaths, births, and immigration can lead to increase in diversity of the community. So let's say, for example, the species has died, okay, in this plant community, and then this species can be replaced by either within the birth of a new species, okay, birth of a species and dispersal from a species present in a nearby plot as represented here, or by immigration of a new species into that empty area. So, and then these processes, births or immigrations, this just goes on until a equilibrium is reached, where there is, so there is the number of births and the number of deaths that is happening is equals to births and immigration. So there is a sort of equilibrium that happens. So whatever the species you're looking at, the species, the diversity, it doesn't change much. So it's at an equilibrium state. So this thing just goes on so till the community reaches equilibrium state, and then that's why we are seeing higher amounts of diversity in the community. That's what this theory puts forward. While Gleason's idea was that the species that you see in a community, let's say this community, are basically nothing but they share similar set of adaptations to that area or abiotic environment. So they are there because the abiotic environment, the temperature, let's say temperature, rainfall, soil conditions, soil pH, are something that these species are adapted to. This species can live in this certain temperature. So the temperature of that area is that one. So that species is there. Set of species that disperses to an area and have shared adaptations to an abiotic environment. So that's how you get to see that community that you are seeing there. And so in each community, you can also classify species based on into species guilds, right? Species guilds are basically nothing but it's a way of looking at species or grouping species that perform similar sort of functions based on their appearances or the way they behave. If you want to go ahead and help me with classifying which species are forming into similar guild, you can please write in the chat box. Like, let's say, let me help you with the first one. uh, okay, if you see this bird, it has a curved beak, and this bird is also curved beak, and no other birds in this it have curved beaks. So I can say these two are little similar, and I put them in a single guild. And simultaneously, you can do it for different species also, right? So first one, we can have a guild where you know species can have this specific perching toes and then these beak types, and these birds are, yeah. So if you look at what these birds are, we know these birds are sunbirds, and they're predominantly nectarivorous, while these birds are woodpeckers. These three birds, and they have this specific way of feeding. They feed on you know insects, and while these two birds are piscivorous, basically they feed on fish. So use not only using the feeding strategy, we can use multiple ways to divide species, group species into similar sort of groups having similar sort of functions. So that's why the species guilds are a little bit important. And then since we are talking about grouping species, we are talking about food and stuff. So we also talk about this concept of niche. So where we are trying to say, where is the species with respect to different environmental factors. Like for example, if you just take two factors like this temperature and rainfall, let's say this species is present in this much of temperature only. It can be found only in this range of temperature and this range of rainfall, out of which it's not seen. So you can call this as the niche of the species, where with respect to the temperature and rainfall. You can have species that prefer low temperatures, low rainfall, or the niche of a species can also overlap with other species niches. So this is what you see in most cases. Sometimes you can see the niche might not overlap, and since this there is this overlap, we all know that there is this thing called competition between species that happens, right? So due to competition, the niche or the area that uh, a species can occupy, you know, reduces. Okay, so which we call it as realized niche. So this is what is true in nature, what we see. But if there is no competition, what we see is referred to as fundamental niche. Okay, so fundamental is what is the potential of the species. If we just have the species, it's only, so what is the environment that the species can occupy. While realized niche is basically because of presence of other species like competitors or mutualistics or any other species, what is the new niche that the species occupies. So it's called realized niche. So realized niche tends to be smaller when when competition is higher in a community than the fundamental niche. Okay, uh, if you want me to put up this in terms of an example, uh, let's take the example of dogs. Okay, dogs and street dogs especially. If let's say an area or a colony which doesn't have dogs, if a couple of dogs came to the colony, and then they can get to go around all of that colony, and then they are like not sole owners of the colony. They can just go around. There is no other restrictions. But after a later date, there is another dog, you know, another group that comes up into the colony. So they also want to share the space. So there happens if because of the competition for space, these dogs segregate for themselves to which area they want to go, which area they avoid because of this competition. So the area now these guys can roam considerably decreases. So they can just roam around few blocks in the colony. The other few blocks are roamed by the other dogs. So because of this competition, as you can see in this example, the area the dogs roam has decreased. So basically, uh, so what it could have occupied without any competitors was higher. Because of the competitors, it decreased. So if you think in terms of the niche, it's the same. So what if the species can occupy without any competitors, or in theory, is called fundamental. Because of competitors, the niche gets reduced. You refer to as realized niche. Okay, I hope this difference was little better or little clear. And ecological succession, because ecological succession is basically a process by which natural communities replace or succeed one another over time. So how the communities keeps on changing. It's not like it's stagnant. Especially if you look at communities on, let's say, if an island had emerged from the ocean, it starts with bare rocks. Because most of the oceanic islands you see are are formed from volcanic eruptions. So what we get out of volcanic eruptions are majorly bare rocks, and these get colonized by a set of species during initial days, so which we call as pioneer species. So for pioneer species, mostly on bare rocks are lichens, and then these lichens are succeeded by grasses, and annual plants. And then these get succeeded by small, shrubs and small heighted plants, which later on get succeeded by tall trees and different set of species altogether. And I think this thing takes hundreds of years to go from pioneer species to a climax community. So wherein climax community is the community that you see at the end, so where the shift doesn't happen anymore, or the succession is not seen as such. And and the species that come in between are referred to as intermediate species or intermediate communities. So the pioneer species are have very few basic requirements. They differ the way the pioneer versus climax communities. If you look at differences, they are relatively short-lived. They're relatively very small, while climax communities are long-lived, very big. The requirements are different. Let's say, for example, plants, huge trees require soil and stuff, while lichens and bryophytes barely require much soil. So they differ in times in the way of the characteristic that they exhibit. And similarly, in secondary succession, what happens is instead of starting from the bare rock, you start, you know, you start from one of these intermediate stages or the climax stages, because there was a catastrophic event that has happened, and then it destroyed the whole community. So since the community is destroyed, there is no species present in that area for the time being. So it just starts again from plants, grasses, and then again it reaches the climax community. If you look here, the secondary succession is relatively faster compared to primary succession, because all the ingredients, if you think of what are things that can support species here, are already present. It's basically species are not what have gone from this location because the catastrophic event has happened. It's not like they're starting from all the way from rocks. The secondary succession is relatively sh- faster. And for example, if you think it of as such, if there is an agriculture field that has been abandoned for a while, you know it's not starting from bare rock. There's something that used to exist there. If there are initially few grasses grows up, and then there are a few shrubs that start coming up. Once the shrubs die out, there will be few trees based on what all species are present around that area will come up, and then eventually it start resembling like small forest patch, and then it eventually reaches a climax stage where there are no further changes that you observe. Okay, so that's the difference. Those are the differences between primary and secondary succession. So as with the plant community, so does the animal community also changes with this type of succession. So species will change. Like you can see more open ground birds. If you're looking at birds, you can see more closed forested birds, whereas the community reaches forested climax. So all the climax not necessarily be a forest. So it's not necessarily every climax community is a forest community. So there can be different it they can be climax community can just be composed of shrub, you know shrub species that are shrubs. So it's not necessarily every species succession leads to a forest. And there are multiple factors that determine what type of climax community you see, whether it's a forest or it's a grassland or it's a shrubland or so on. Like temperature and rainfall are some of the important of them. Soil, the nutrition type determines what type of climax community we see. And events like fires, cyclones, and tsunamis eventually, because they lead to succession, especially secondary succession. And this climax community is basically the species community is not really in climax, but they are out of climax because of human disturbances. Okay, so how do we look at human disturbances? So let me just go back to that thing. stability and resilience, which I was referring to earlier. So if you most climate communities, have relatively lower variability, or basically they are relatively more stable despite shifting and environmental conditions. Little bit of conditions, they can more or less stay the same, they will not change much. And then there are also some of those communities are resilient. That is, if you cut down few of the trees, they will eventually, or if you put up some sort of disturbance, they will eventually go back to the same stage. But what we humans are doing is basically we are shifting this stage, that after a certain point, after a certain threshold, each system will be affected. We are degrading ecosystems because the systems is does not provide some sort of uh, functions because of the shift in the system state. From, let's say the system was here, and then it has shifted due to human pressures, like you're converted into grassland and urban ecosystem. It has completely become something else, or formed a new system altogether. So you are basically messing around with it. So systems will change. So that's what this. And if you're if it's the system has changed because of you, so we refer to them as this climax community. What are the climax community that you're seeing because of human disturbances, we refer it to as this climax. And there's this concept of keystone species, which everyone might have also heard of it. Basically, it refers to species, that has a very important role in the community. Let's say, for example, ficus. Okay, this ficus bengalensis, which is present all across, distributed most across the Indian subcontinent, has a greater role. So if you look at this tree, especially in the summers, middle of the summers, where most of the trees are bare, the species is green, and then often produces figs that are enjoyed by birds, which are like a lifeline for the species present in that area. And these keystone species have higher effect, have disproportionately larger effect when you look at their abundance. So just a if you look, let's say, the single tree can have you know support hundreds of birds. So saving this tree can help 100 birds. So it's not like one tree is helping just one bird. So since they are having this disproportionately higher effect than their abundance, these species are referred to as keystone species. And then, yeah, conserving keystone species are crucial because they help us conserve the species that are dependent on it simultaneously. And the other important thing was, since we are discussing about dominance and evenness in communities, having a dominant species regulate help you know mm, a community that has a dominant species tends to play a crucial role in regulating species diversity and ecosystem productivity. Like a species that is numerically dominant in a forest community, let's say for example, sal community or teak community, the sal species, sal tree or the teak tree can decrease species diversity by influencing the establishment of new species. It may not allow other species to germinate or propagate themselves, and then it, that's thereby reducing the diversity of the community thereby itself. So that's one of the negative effects of having a dominant species. It just keeps on reducing the diversity instead of making it more even. So that's about how dominance of a species affects the diversity. Sometimes having a dominant species can uh, positively affect species diversity, but in very few occasions. Let's Yeah. Uh, I think, yeah, that's all for it. I think yeah, I have covered what I wanted to speak about as of now. So if you have any questions regarding this session or previous things, previous sessions or assignments, yeah, do let me know so that I can cover. So if you guys don't have any questions, we'll stop here. But if you have, I can wait and take few questions or help you clarify some more. Okay, since it seems like no one has any questions, so in that case, we'll stop here. And yeah, that's all for today. Thank you for joining and listening to